Hi Anna, and welcome to video number 2. We continue with cultural difference and identity. I've chosen to highlight the educational outcomes of 2 migrant families that I know. The first one is Vickers and his family, and I've worked with Vickers in a previous job for many years and became very good friends with him and his wife and their children. Vickers, who's Afrikaans, and his Brazilian wife and their 2 interracial children emigrated from South Africa. And this was a number of years ago, 15 years ago. They saw a very difficult future for their children in face of the black economic empowerment that was in place in South Africa. When they moved to Australia, their 2 children were primary school age. They attended public schools and then went on to university and are now employed in Australia. The parents have maintained their culture and their language. The children have learned some of their parents' culture and language, but consider themselves to be Australians, first of all, with migrant parents. The second example that I will use is Samra and her husband and 1 small child. Now, I met Samra approximately 17 years ago when she worked for me as a vacation student while she was at university in Tasmania. So Samra and her family were refugees of the Bosnian War. They were finally allowed to settle after a very uncertain period in a detention centre on the outskirts of Hobart, where they were threatened with return to their war-torn homeland. Following their settlement, Samra went to university and gained professional employment, and their child has entered the public school system. Now, both families are very appreciative to have settled into a safe, meritocratic country that's free of discrimination when compared to their respective homelands. They both suffered considerable losses in the process of getting here. Vickers, from his perspective, a financial loss and a career delay, I suppose. Left a very, very good job in South Africa and took a big step down from an employment perspective. Samra and her family were refugees in a detention centre, so they bear many emotional and physical scars from coming to Australia, and financial as well, because they effectively just had to leave everything that they had in their home country and come to Australia with basically nothing. Both families have successfully accessed the Australian public education system, and they're perfect examples of new Australian citizens, and they are now all Australian citizens. Now, from a professional's perspective as a teacher, taking what I've learned from my personal experiences, how can I integrate this into schooling to assist students of migrant families? I think to start with, we must be very, very mindful of migrant or refugee students. They could have had a very traumatic, delayed or long, violent journey to get to Australia. They may be severely disadvantaged. They may have English as a second language, and because of the long duration in getting to Australia and out into the community, they may have large gaps in their education. They may also be very new to Australia, as I said, to the language, if they've got English as a second language, and to the culture of Australia. So this all comes from Connell et al., these findings, and what can be done. So in my view as teachers, I think we need to show empathy. We need to make allowances for our disadvantaged students and provide differentiation in our teaching towards them. And we must also obviously embrace multiculturalism. Now, what can be done in terms of education policy to enhance the education of refugee children in Australia. So this first statement here is in regard to refugees. Some may have had the opportunity for intermittent schooling in refugee camps. This is not a frequent and common experience. So this is a direct quote from Cornell, and it quite concerned me, and I assumed that it applied to children in refugee camps in other countries. So I did some more reading, and I've come across some interesting publications by the Australian Human Rights Commission over a number of years, looking at the refugee and detention centre situation in Australia. And the statement made in this reference the failure of the Commonwealth to provide education to school-aged children on Christmas Island between July 2013 and July 2014. So this concerned me a lot, and I thought that Australia had a better human rights treatment than this. So some outcomes from Cornell, first of all, is that we could change federal government policies that demonise asylum seekers and promote the fear of the other. And from the Australian Human Rights Commission report, it's recommended that the Migration Act be amended to provide that children and parents be detained only for a strictly limited period of time necessary. And what this would do would mean that children would be out and into the mainstream population of Australia more quickly, so that they could access education in Australia. And this will greatly assist in their well-being and settlement into Australia. At the moment, we have families and children in detention for, in some cases, years and years, which is detrimental to all aspects of their health. The next subject is gender. So this comes from Chapter 8 of Cornell et al. This mind map was drawn using SpiderScribe, which I found really easy to use. Now, there are some small differences in educational outcomes for a gender minority. However, they're outweighed by other factors such as socioeconomic status and parents' education. In regard to a minority here, LGBTI students of same-sex families, effeminate males, and also into the minority, or those who there's some inequality against, are females. So key issues relating to educational outcomes with regard to gender. Now, gender is different to sex. It includes current social and community aspects of being male or female. There are some concerns over the feminisation of teaching, so that is the fact that the majority of teachers are female, and this is not at all supported by student outcomes. Now, score gaps, so now we're talking specifically about grades and scholastic results. There are some differences between boys and girls, and they're fairly small. But bigger differences are a result of, as I said, socioeconomic status and parents' educational outcomes. Parents' education levels. The notion that boys are uniformly failing and girls are uniformly winning does not hold true. High school completion rates are 10% higher for girls at 80% than they are for boys. And this is a result of there simply being less job opportunities for girls to go to who would like to leave school early, whereas boys leave for vocational education and training. Degendering of teaching has both positive and negative effects, and as teachers we must be careful how this is applied. So, for instance, degendering the classroom in terms of discipline is a good thing, but in some aspects we need to think that some students, particularly females, learn at a faster rate than males and therefore may need extension work. So we must be mindful of how we apply degendering to our classrooms. Bullying. Generally, it's by boys towards girls, but also by boys towards girls, effeminate boys, and LGBTI students. Basically, anyone who is seen as a negative other. And interestingly, students and teachers are victims. Often, victims become perpetrators. And something that is an issue that isn't specifically related to the student's outcome, but is quite interesting anyway, is that most teachers are female, but less school management positions are held by women. They're mostly held by men. And this is especially the case in independent schools. Now, I've chosen to highlight the education outcomes of children of same-sex parents and LGBTI students, as I have a few friends who are gay, and same-sex marriage is currently forefront in the public focus. So from my time at Redcliffe State High School, from my PEP placement earlier this year, in discussions with some teachers, it was reported there's definitely a tolerance of LGBTI students at that school, and a definite lack of bullying of LGBTI students, which is really pleasing to see. The tolerance was even to the point that there was an LGBTI society at the school, and they held regular meetings at lunchtime. Another interesting example is from my children's primary school, where they all attended. And my son, when he was in year 6, there was a transgender student who actually transitioned from a girl to a boy between term 3 and term 4. So the first day of term 4, Xavier did not come to school, but the teacher, after having made plans with the parents, informed the students of what was going to be happening, and that Xavier was now going to be coming to school as a boy. So this was well planned. When I asked my son about it, he said that Xavier always played with us boys and nothing has changed. So that to me just shows complete acceptance by teachers and students of a student who is transgendering from female to male in primary school, which I found very surprising. I found it surprising that it was happening so early in life, but hats off to everybody for accepting that. Now, same-sex marriage is definitely a big current topic, and it's of interest to me, as I said, because I have some gay friends. So what are the educational outcomes for children of same-sex families? The first thing to note is it's not a widely researched topic. There's very little research actually been done in Australia, and there's almost no research into children of parents of 2 gay men together. There's more research with 2 lesbian women together having children. There are also examples of biased and politically motivated research by groups with preconceived agendas. The information that I've taken here is from an Australian federal government publication, so I'm viewing that as being credible information. So, some direct quotes. Most studies suggest that children raised by lesbian parents do at least as well as their peers with heterosexual parents when compared on a range of social, psychological, and educational variables. In some cases, they actually do better. Now, this work is taken from Dempsey, 2013. One of the downsides is that children of same-sex families worry about being bullied. Their worry seems to be greater than the actual instances of bullying. However, to a modest level, they still are bullied. So from a professional perspective, what can we do as teachers for students from LGBTI families and LGBTI students themselves? We must watch for bullying and discrimination.